Good evening to all doctors. On behalf of Science Integra and Sun Inca Life Sciences, I welcome you all for the ISAR EMOX webinar series on the topic, I Want to Have My Own Baby. I now invite Dr. Sunil Jindal to share his thoughts on this topic and the series.
Yeah, can you pin my video, please? And stop the share screen, please. It's been such a pleasure to be here. And Dr. Nandita and I, for a long time, had been thinking about what kind of a program should we have in which what every couple wants is to have their own babies. And there is a lot of third-party reproduction going on. That's fine. But the desire for every human being to have his own babies is what is most important. So Dr. Nandita and I sat down and created this program, which is a series. And this is first in the series, which is Madam is going to speak about in poor responders, how to give them their own babies. I will speak about azoospermia. The second is about recurrent pregnancy loss, the female and the male factor. The third program is genetics of the female and genetics of the male. And the fourth, of course, is something which, Dr. Nita excels in, which is the frozen eggs, the social freezing, how it has become so important. And I would speak about the anatomical corrections so that surrogacy may not be needed and the woman could use her own uterus. So this first episode is of poor responders and azoospermics. It is under the banner of ISAR and EMOGS, and Sun has been kind enough to sponsor the program. So Meenalji, on to you to please introduce Dr. Nandita so that we could carry on with the program right away.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Jindal. I welcome Dr. Nandita Palshitkar, who actually needs no introduction as she is known to all the gynecologists as the past FOXY president for the year 2019, president of EMOGS 2020 to 2022. She has been the past president of MOGS 2016 and president of IAGE in 2017. She is currently the professor in obstetrics and gynecology at DY Patil Medical College, Navi Mumbai, and the teacher for super specialty degree FNB Reproductive Medicine, Delhi. She is a practicing infertility specialist for the past more than 25 years and director at 9 Bloom IVF centers. I welcome Dr. Nandita Palshitkar for this webinar series and request her to please start her talk on her topic.
Thank you, Meena. Thank you. I think, Sunil, thank you for that lovely introduction to the series. I think it was wonderful that, we see a lot of patients and all of them come and tell us that, no, we want to have a child which is our own. And I think that's so very important. And that is how this whole series came about. People walking into my clinic and saying, sorry, we don't want an egg donor. We don't want a sperm donor. We would like to have our own child. Some of them even don't want surrogacy. So I think that's what set it off, that today we have so many advances and we can definitely help our patients conceive their own child. And that is what this whole series is about. And today we are going to talk about the ovary. I'm going to talk about the ovary and Dr. Jindal is going to talk about the sperm. So I think we are really going to, throw some light into very different technologies, different treatments that are available and the age-old treatments which are there with evidence-based so that you know what works and what doesn't. So this Poseidon group was actually launched in 2014, and in 2016 they came up with this criteria of poor responders. Just 1 minute, I need to just reduce this. Yeah, sorry. Okay. Yeah. Can you see the screen? Hello?
Yes, madam. You
Yeah,
can
yeah.
see.
Okay, thank you. So this Poseidon classification was very important because there was two groups of patients that we typically saw. That one group was where it was very, very low, the reserve, that is group 3 and group 4. But the ovarian markers, the age, the antral follicle count, the AMH was low, that is less than 1.2 AMH and AFC less than 5. And the other group was where the AMH, the AFC was a good, like a normal patient. But when you gave them stimulation, they responded like a poor responder. So that was Poseidon group and 1 and 2. Good reserve, age less than 35 is group 1, and age more than 35 is group 2. And poor reserve, age less than 35 is group 3, and age more than 35 is group 4. So this is a very simple classification, very clinical classification, and it helps us in treatment a lot. And I'm going to discuss it today. My talk is just divided into two parts. One is the ovarian stimulation and the other is adjuvants. These are things that we need to know. So let's look at the ovarian stimulation. So generally high dose gonadotropins are used. All preparations are equally good. And protocols which can be implemented are, of course, the antagonist protocol, where you start the gonadotropins on day 2 to day 12 and start the antagonist when the leading follicle is 14 mm or from day 6. In poor ovarian reserve, you can actually start it when the leading follicle is 14, because a lot of young patients have shorter cycles and the oocytes grow faster. So you have to be very aware that sometimes the follicle is 14 mm on day 6 itself. Then, of course, the mild stimulation, which works wonderful. We use clomiphene citrate from day 2 to day 6, or as I prefer, letrozole from day 2 to day 6, 5 milligrams per day, and then add gonadotropins to it. So the gonadotropins are added on day 6 so that they overlap with the letrozole and then continue till the trigger. And of course, we add the antagonist also. Then is the long agonist protocol. Long agonist protocol has actually been recommended for Poseidon group 1, where they're young patients and they've not responded well. So you can actually use the long agonist protocol and then add the LH recombinant with the LH, and it gives very good results, or use only HMG. The ultra short agonist protocol has also been recommended. What do I do in my practice? I normally use the antagonist protocol. So I start with a high dose 300 in Poseidon 1 and 2 groups, or even 415 per group 1 and group 2. But group 3 and group 4, actually it doesn't matter if you use 300 or 450. So my protocol is 450, the antagonist protocol. 300 to 450 is the dose in which I individualize the treatment depending on the patient, of HMG from day 2 to day 12. And antagonist is added when the leading follicle is 14. Of course, mild stimulation, if the first time the antagonist protocol, the high dose gonadotropin protocol gives me only 1 or 2 eggs, then I switch to mild stimulation, because for the only reason is that practically it becomes very expensive and I want the patient to undergo 3-4 cycles. So that is why I switch to mild stimulation protocol. Dual stimulation is also of good use, especially in Poseidon 1 and Poseidon 2 patients. And it works very well. You can, in dual stimulation, you have to use the GnRH analog trigger. So what we do is, when we do the pickup, you should not do the stimulation. You should not take the follicles which are 10 and 11 millimeters, 12 millimeters, leave them behind for the next stimulation. So dual stimulation is what? You start on day 2, you give an antagonist, you do the pickup, but the trigger is given with a GnRH analog. Leave the follicles which are less than 12 mm behind, do not puncture them. Then again, after 4 days, just start the gonadotropin and you can go ahead. If it's a cancer patient, you can use letrozole instead of letrozole throughout the cycle to keep the E2 levels low. Now, embryo pooling is something that I do, that is, do multiple cycles, get a lot of eggs, create the embryos, pool them, and then I start doing the transfers. And HCG or dual trigger is something that I like. So dual trigger, this particular study in 2020 July, it's very, very new, and it has said that they had Poseidon group 4 patients, meaning what? Older patients with low reserve. 194 patients received dual trigger and 114 received HCG only. And dual trigger resulted in significantly higher number of eggs, M2 eggs, fertilized oocytes, and top quality blastocysts, and definitely a higher CPR, clinical pregnancy rate, and live birth rate in dual trigger group. So this is something that we can add to our practice very easily, and you can use. So use GnRH full dose and even the HCG full dose. Then daily letrozole with gonadotropin also improves outcomes in poor or suboptimal responders. And this was also a 2020 June study. So this is something which I haven't used and I intend to do because it looks simple. So what are the adjuvants that we use? Now let's go to the pre-treatment part of it. So the adjuvants that I would use is DHEA and testosterone, the androgens. I think the mechanism is really uncertain, but it has been speculated that it increases the concentration of IGF-1. This, of course, what it does, it improves the response to gonadotropins. Remember that the microenvironment of the follicle is deficient in androgens. And that is why the DHA and the testosterone go there and improve it, make it more sensitive. You know, it makes it more sensitive, the receptors sensitive to FSH-LH. It improves steroidogenesis, which is a precursor for estradiol and testosterone. Creation of a PCOS-like characteristics and increasing LH, acts as a pre-hormone for follicular fluid testosterone, reduces age-related aneuploidy by affecting meiotic chromosome segregation, and increases the small antral follicles and the AMH levels. I think these are all very good effects which the androgens have on the ovary. So how do we use DHA? I love DHA. It's initiated 3 months before starting IVF. I continue it till the trigger. The dose that I use is 75 milligrams per day. And Cochrane review, which was in 2015 by Nagels, 10 RCTs and 7 RCTs, and that were with poor responders. And pooling the RCTs, reported that the live birth rate improved with DHEA pre-treatment, but the quality of evidence was moderate. But all of us have used it and know that it is very good. And believe me, the longer you give it, the better it is. I continue it for till the patient gets pregnant. So maybe it's 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, even 5 months. So that is the importance of DHA. Testosterone is a transdermal application, gel or patches. It has to be given over 20 days or 30 days or even 2 weeks just before your stimulation. Dose is 10 to 12.5 milligrams daily. And as I mentioned, 2 to 4 weeks in the previous cycle. A recent meta-analysis in 2019 included 7 trials. It suggested that testosterone may increase the live birth rate, the clinical pregnancy rate, and the number of oocytes and embryos. In fact, there is an ongoing T-transport trial, which will actually give us very robust information about transdermal testosterone, and we are awaiting the results of this trial. Growth hormone. Growth hormone receptors are located in the egg, in the follicular somatic tissue. So growth hormone acts on the receptors and it's responsible for the pre-antral follicular growth and differentiation. So growth hormone further stimulates small antral follicle to gonadotropin independent stages as well as maturation of the oocyte. So this is very important, and it acts in the dose of 4 to 12 international units per day. And the meta-analysis by Salam et al. Actually showed that growth hormone was the only one, though there were only 3 studies and less number of patients, but growth hormone has shown to have a good result. And this 2020 study was that there were 127 poor responder patients, and though it showed that there was no difference between the two groups, but the meta-analysis and systemic review of 12 RCTs shows that it may improve reproductive outcome in poor responders, but it has to prove, and we have used it in, I think the main uses will be in those patients who have a reduction, low levels of growth hormone. So in that, it will definitely help. Coenzyme Q has been there for ages. We all know it helps to reduce the oxidative stress in the mitochondria. And that's how it improves the oocyte competence. And recent RCTs giving patients of Poseidon Group 3 treatment with CoQ for 60 days, and the treatment group showed increased number of oocytes retrieved and better quality of day 3 embryos as compared to the control. And we have all been using CoQ for a long, long time. In fact, my dietitian started me when I was on a diet to lose weight. And I think I've been using it for the last 10 years, ever since she put me on CoQ. Melatonin is another molecule which I really love. The oxidative stress is there in the peritoneal, serum, and follicular microenvironment that results in a poor oocyte quality. And the mechanism is unclear, but it's said to reduce the oxidative stress by acting like a free radical scavenger. The meta-analysis and systemic review of 10 RCTs show a significantly increased CPR, but not LBR. But I know that melatonin increased the M2 sites and the good quality embryos. So the quality of the eggs is definitely affected by melatonin. L-arginine, 50 trials, including 6,000 plus women. We know nitric oxide is a product of L-arginine, and this modulator is useful in many biological processes, especially the ovarian physiology. There's low quality evidence, very insufficient to draw any conclusions, but all of us have been using it, and there have been studies which are showing that L-arginine gives you better quality eggs and gives more number of oocytes. Estradiol pretreatment coordinates follicular growth. In a lot of patients, I've noticed that the follicular growth is not cohesive, and giving estradiol pretreatment is good. What are the advantages? Milder FSH suppression, lesser reduction in overall antral follicles. Can be used when OC pills are contraindicated, does not affect spontaneous fertility potential. Normally what I use is 4 milligrams per day from day 20 to the first day of the next menstrual cycle. Ovarian rejuvenation, I think that is that is something new, and that is something that a lot of IVF centers are using, and I would like to talk about it. So PRP, platelet-rich plasma. I think that is something that everybody is using it, and these platelet-rich plasma, by activating the platelets in PRP, cytokines and growth factors become bioactive, and they're secreted within 10 minutes. And what are these factors? VEGF, transforming growth factor, platelet-derived growth factor, epidermal growth factor, connective tissue growth factor, fibroblast growth factor, IGF-1 and 2, IL-8, etc. All these can promote healing by regulating stem cell migration, attachment, proliferation, and differentiation, and promote the extracellular matrix accumulation. And this was a study in 2020 where 200 women attempted IVF after PRP, and 82 women developed embryos. So nearly 30% of the women did develop embryos, and 25 women cryopreserved. Out of the 57 women who underwent ET, 13 live births were obtained. That's 23% per transfer. 23 women conceived spontaneously. PRP can be used in women with POI as an alternative experimental treatment option. We injected during the pickup. So during the pickup, we inject the PRP into the ovary transvaginally. You can also do it laparoscopically, where you can hold the ovary and inject this PRP. So the idea is get maximum concentration of PRP in a smaller volume. That is what is important. And we've already got a patient pregnant and who's about to deliver. Stem cells. I think that is something that is very, very popular, and it is an experimental procedure, PRP as well as stem cells, and we need to, the basic origin of the stem cells, we can have them from three sources. The ones which we use in ovarian rejuvenation are bone marrow derived stem cells, and this was a study of 17 women with poor ovarian reserve, and it was seen that 81% of the patients, there was increase in AMH and antral follicle count in 2 weeks time. And this was a beautiful paper by Pelissa and Herraiz, and their paper now, when I read, which is in press, they had they took biopsies from poor ovarian reserve patients, ovarian biopsies, and these were implanted into 2 sets of mice, and these mice were given the bone marrow derived stem cells, and they found that the follicles developed. So this is something that is showing fantastic results and probably is here to stay. And as soon as our ICMR, we've already registered the trial with ICMR. As soon as the ICMR allows some multi-centric trials, we'll be able to start it in our own country without a problem. The ovarian in vitro activation. We have a PTEN inhibitor and a PIK3 enhancer. Now, what these 2 molecules do is they enhance growth. So PIK3 inhibitor is actually used for cancer patients. So we use the PTEN inhibitor and the PIK3 enhancer for activation of the ovary. So what we do is that laparoscopic ovarian harvesting is done, then 2 days of incubation with a PTEN inhibitor and a PIK3 enhancer to stimulate signaling and activation of the dormant follicles. These ovaries are then regrafted, which allows the retrieval of mature oocytes. IVF ET is done when the patient was, where pregnancy was obtained. The in vitro activation technology can effectively activate residual follicles in some patients with POI and allow them to conceive their own genetic offspring. IVA may also be useful for treating patients with ovarian dysfunction, including aging women and cancer survivors. Mitochondrial rejuvenation or augment. This is a technique where the egg precursor cells are taken from a small biopsy of the ovary. These precursor cells are then cultured and frozen for storage. Mitochondria from these precursor cells are then injected along with the sperm into the aging oocyte, because generally the oocyte ages and the mitochondria also ages. So you inject more mitochondria so that there is more energy, and then what happens is the oocyte becomes better and the pregnancy rates, the embryo formation rates are improved with this technology. This is known as augment. It is expensive. We have to send the material to America, and that's why it's not that very popular. Now, spindle transfer. Spindle is your chromosome. So there are 2 ways you can do it. As Johnny Zhang, our friend in New York, he went to Mexico and delivered a baby because of the mitochondrial disease in the patient. So what we do is we have a egg which is of the patient, and we have another egg which is of the donor. So from the donor, you remove the nuclear material. That means you remove the chromosomes and take the chromosomes from the patient's egg and insert them into that donor oocyte. So then it becomes like the same genetic material as the patient, but with younger the younger oocyte, that is the mitochondria younger, everything is younger. And that egg can be used for fertilization. This is how Johnny Zhang achieved a pregnancy. Whereas Nuno Costos, what he did was that he allowed the patient to fertilize, the oocyte to fertilize. So once the fertilized material, that is 46 chromosomes, are taken and put in back into a fertilized zygote only. So in that way, there is fusion occurs and you can have a baby. So this is how Nuno Costo achieved the pregnancy. What about the technology of spindle check? I think this is a beautiful technology where we use the poloscope, and you can see that luminescence. You can see the transparent white polar body, which is at about 8 o'clock position. And once you've identified it, you know that you cannot damage it when you perform the ICSI, because damage to the spindle will cause no fertilization or aneuploidies. And especially when you have very few eggs in a patient, you need to use this technology. The other advantage of the poloscope is also that without actually, it's a non-invasive method for blastocyst ploidy. And this was a beautiful article published in January 2020, where you can, with the poloscope, you can identify a normal, as you see in slide A, figure A, that's a normal spindle. B is dysmorphic, C is translucent, D is telophase, and E is not visible. And this particular study has shown that A and B usually, the type of this oocyte meiotic spindle, if it's type A and type B, then those are euploid. So those embryos can be used. And this is a beautiful non-invasive way of doing it. Pre-genetic testing. This is also one way of helping poor ovarian reserve patients conceive. Now, let me just explain this to you. A is aneuploidy. Aneuploidy means the number of chromosomes. So 22 chromosome pairs plus X and Y. So any, if they're double, if they're triple, if they are single, monosomy, triploidy, can be identified by PGT-A. And PGT-M is monogenic diseases. And those are single gene diseases. For example, the BRCA1, BRCA2, these are autosomal dominant diseases, or sickle cell or thalassemia. These are all examples of PGT-M. And PGT-SR is structural rearrangements. So structural rearrangements is something that is inherited from the parent. The parent could have balanced or unbalanced translocations, Robertsonian's translocations. Now, all these can be identified in the embryo by doing PGT-SR. So these are the three different ways in which you can identify. And in the poor responder patient, especially in older patients, it is what it does is reduces the miscarriage rate, even if she is above 40. So any patient who is a poor responder, who is above 35, I think it's worth doing PGT-A, because if the embryo is euploid, it's normal, then she has a pregnancy rate which is like the normal responder. Now we have a new technology which we're using in Bombay, and this is the non-invasive chromosomal screening. If you look at the picture, there is an egg, then ICSI is performed, and day 5, day 6 blastocyst is grown in culture media. So in non-invasive, what we do is we just pick up this culture medium, and this culture medium goes through the NICS sample preparation, that is the Malbac system, and then library preparation for NGS, and then the NGS sequencing occurs and the result occurs. So that means you are not touching the embryo. It is absolutely non-invasive. It is easy to do. There is no sample loss. It's got high sensitivity, and artificial intelligence is also being used. So NICS depends on the DNA that is released by the entire embryo. That is trophectoderm cells and inner cell mass in the surrounding culture media. Is there too much disturbance? तुम्हाला सांगितलेलं ना ते लावू नका, ते बंद कर बघू. Sorry about this. NICS depends on DNA that is released by the entire embryo, that is trophectoderm and the inner cell mass. It increases the chances of getting sufficient amount of DNA to amplify and get to a conclusive result, while PGS depends on the DNA that is extracted from the 4 to 5 trophectoderm cells that were biopsied. And if the biopsy is not done properly, it may result in killing the biopsied cell, causing degradation of the DNA and hampering the quality of results. Our preliminary data, we've done about 90 embryos. Out of that, we've had 15 pregnancies, and miscarriage rate is 2. we have not utilized all the embryos, but it's a fantastic technique which is giving good results. Artificial ovary. Alloderm is decellularized human extracellular tissue. It is used in cosmetology, cosmetic surgery also. And Octane 2016 published the first pregnancies in 2 patients with live birth. So what he did was ovarian tissue transplant. After the ovarian tissue is thawed, especially in patients who have very high level chances of metastasis, you can actually take the primordial follicles and put it on this decellularized human extracellular tissue matrix. And it creates an ovary, and after 2 weeks, you can actually put this back into the body, and you can do stimulation and do pickups. So it's a fantastic technology which can be used for those poor ovarian reserve patients, those who have had treatment and they have frozen their ovary before, and you don't want to put the metastasis back into the patient. And this is a beautiful paper by Humaydin, and it was just published in July 2020. And that's what I was trying to add to the presentation today, that in group 1 and 2 Poseidon, how should we go about? So group 1 and 2 is actually because of maybe FSH, LH polymorphism in the receptors. So it could be a genetic cause also. So yeah, if you have a patient who's willing to try, check it out, you can do genetic studies. I have done, and I've actually found these patients. And these patients, if the genetic screening comes positive, then you have to increase the FSH dose. So yes, if you don't want to do genetics, practically you can just increase the FSH dose, and these patients would do very well. In these patients, consider androgen in selected patients, especially those where the ovarian reserve markers are just at the lower limit. So in those patients, use androgens, use CoQ, use arginine. Then the stimulation is what I do in this is 300 or 450. And adding LH also helps in these patients. So you can add LH right from day 2, that is use HMG right from day 2, or give recombinant FSH plus recombinant LH. And the trigger, usually we do a GnRH trigger in an antagonist protocol and elective embryo freezing if the patient's AFC is more and the AMH is more than 3.3. See, remember, these are good reserve patients who are not responding properly. Or consider even PGTA in Poseidon group 2, particularly patients who are older than 38, because this will give them a time to pregnancy will be faster. And consider single blastocyst embryo transfer in these patients. The second chart is about Poseidon group 3 and 4. So adjuvant treatment, I think, works very well in this group. This is the group where you should use your CoQ, you should use your RG prime, you should use your DHEA, you should use your melatonin, etc. And growth hormone also can be given in this patient. Pre-treatment with estrogens would work well in this patient. So Poseidon group 3, 300 international units of FSH, or of course, whichever HMG if you want to use. And in the Poseidon group 4, we start with 300 plus 150. So FSH plus LH or HMG can be used. And in some patients, some studies have said long protocol with HCG trigger gives good results. But I think when you want to repeat the protocols, you want to do 2-3 attempts, then an antagonist protocol with a dual trigger is something that you can use, or a dual stimulation in one cycle with a GnRH analog trigger. So this is the flow chart which you can use for your patients. And I would like to end my talk by saying adjuvants play a very important role in improving results in POR. Consider dual trigger, IVF or HC results are same, so you can do either. offer all available options to the patient, and future looks promising when the need of oocyte donor may be eliminated completely. And I haven't actually added that you can actually create the oocytes even in the lab, though it's not possible right now. It may soon happen, and that is what we are looking at, something that we are looking at. So friends, thank you very much. I think it was exhausting, but I tried to cover everything and I hope it was clear. Dr. Jindal, I think, is Meenal going to introduce you?
Yes, I think
Yeah, dynamic person.
Meenal is going to introduce me.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I love
doctor.
your camera.
So I,
Yeah,
Shriman,
Meenal,
can you please share your screen?
You want me to share my screen?
Shriman, Doctor, yeah. So now I welcome Dr. Sunil Jindal for his talk on no sperms, how to give them their own genetic babies. Dr. Sunil Jindal is Chief Consultant Laparoscopic Surgeon and Andrologist and Reproductive Medicine Specialist of Jindal Hospital.
Mike.
He is the Scientific Director of Dr. Madhu Jindal Memorial Test Tube Baby Center, Meerut. He is the Vice Chairperson of Delhi ISAR, Delhi IH, and he has won gold medal of Best Postgraduate MAMC in New Delhi, and he has won over 75 awards from different organizations. He has several publications and presentations in his name, chapters in 8 textbooks on fertility, and over 200 national and international presentations. His special interest is in fertility enhancing and gynecological laparoscopic surgery. And also, he's a very good singer by passion. So I now welcome Dr. Sunil Jindal to start his talk on his topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Meenalji, for the kind introduction. And I would really like if you could pin my video at the moment. Great. So it's an interesting topic because Dr. Nandita has so beautifully explained of these women who are poor responders when they come to you, how to give them their eggs. But men are a very sensitive breed. Men are so sensitive that first of all, they don't come to your clinic. And when they come to your clinic, they're not ready to get a semen analysis done. If they get a semen analysis done, they don't come to show you the report. And finally, when they come to show you the report, they say everything is fine. So this is the issue with men, the way they are. And I'm going to talk to you about today about a situation when there are no sperms and how to give these people their own babies when there are no sperms. So to begin with, the key concepts which I would like to place over here are, number one, the sperm count is going down the century. Now this sperm count has actually become 50% in the last century. There are a couple of new diagnostic tools which have come up, which are beyond the semen analysis. Antioxidant supplementation is extremely hot as an issue today. There is a lot available for azoospermic men seeking fertility, and biological fatherhood is possible even in the worst case scenario. Spermatogonial stem cells represent a novel cell source for reproductive and regenerative medicine. This is the way the WHO has, from 1980 till now, come up with a new manual where the semen analysis today is not placed as normal. It is placed as a percentile, in which, in this percentage of people, 95% above this were able to get a child. So this is the 5th percentile. which we all know, which I will not go into here. But for us to understand that the threshold value of semen analysis having an acceptable specificity, but a very low sensitivity. And therefore, caution should be used in interpretation of results in relation to the WHO manual reference values. The new diagnostic tests, which I'm talking to you about, after which I'll immediately come on to azoospermia. And these new diagnostic tests are sperm DNA integrity, reactive oxygen species, and Y chromosome microdeletion. I will only talk about these three tests, though there could be a battery of a dozen of them. Now, what has been the recent advancement? The recent advancement has been in terms of sperm DNA function, which means sperm functioning tests. There has been a lot of advancement in microsurgery, the way it is used, the videos of which I'm going to show to you. And there is a lot of work which has gone into the genetic diagnosis at the moment. So sperm DNA integrity, we all know that though the number of sperms may be fine, but pregnancy is not taking place. There are unexplained infertility, recurrent pregnancy loss, poor outcomes of IUI and IVF. And this is because of the DNA strand breakages. Now let us understand that the sperm has a head which has a lot of chromatin and it has very less cytoplasm. So any injury which takes place to this is going to be to the DNA. And the breakage of these strands is going to lead to subfertility. Now, antioxidants are hot today. They're hot today for the reason that coenzyme Q, vitamin E, melatonin, arginine, zinc, selenium, lycopene, and along with that, a lot of antioxidants, if taken for a period of 2 to 3 months or a bit above it too, will lead to a repair in the DNA strands in a couple of patients. So therefore, if the DNA integrity is bad, antioxidants help in getting it better. Even in azoospermics, whenever we retrieve sperms, we normally would give these people antioxidants so that we may have a better retrieval. Y chromosome microdeletion, once again, if it is found out, which we normally do from blood, we would have an idea of what are the chances of these people having a pregnancy and whether we should take them up for a sperm retrieval or not. Why? Because if the deletion is in the AZFA area, there will be no sperms retrievable. If they are in the AZFB area, there would be no sperms retrievable. And in AZFC area, 70% of patients, we can retrieve sperms. But if a boy is born, he will have the same problem. So this counseling needs to be done. Now let's come to azoospermia. I am going to talk about azoospermia primarily. And this complex subject, I would like to demystify and make it as simple as possible. So it could be pre-testicular, which means before the testes, the FSH, LH is pre-testicular. It could be testicular if the problem is in the testes, and it could be post-testicular if there is a blockage. So it could be three types of things which we possibly could be having. Now, azoospermia happens in 1 to 3% of males. So the first thing which I normally do is when a man enters my clinic and he's azoospermic, he is in a lot of anxiety. I normally tell him that, well, you are not alone. About 1 to 3% of human population have an absence of sperms. The only thing is, anybody with absent sperms does not tell the other person that he doesn't have sperms. And therefore, The moment they come to know about it, they feel reassured, number one. Number two, I normally tell them, if you want a baby with your own sperm, there is a chance that 70% there is a chance you could have your own baby. So these are a few things which I have personally felt need to be told to these patients. Well, there can be two types of azoospermia, obstructive, non-obstructive. I would like to speak about it further in a mind map. So I would speak about this and just let you know that I have just tried to put in an algorithm for you on a mind map for you to understand of what is a workup which you would do in an azoospermic who has low volume azoospermia. So if there is a low volume azoospermia, you, in the volume, if it is less than 1 ml and the pH is less than 6.5, you do a physical examination. And what you would find in the physical examination of them is you would like to palpate the vas. And when palpating the vas, just a minute. Just a minute. I think I'll just share the screen. So I hope you're able to see my screen now. There was some problem because of which it was not coming in the mind map. Can you see my screen now?
No, sir, it's not clear. You need to, it's not full screen. It's half only. Yeah. Correct.
Can you see it now?
Yes,
Can
sir,
you see? Yeah, fine. So this is an algorithm for the workup of low volumes azoospermia. If it is less in volume, you do a physical examination. In the physical examination, when you do a physical examination, you palpate the vas. You see if the testis is normal or small in size. You do a per rectal examination of this patient to see the size of the seminal vesicles and the prostate. And in the physical examination, you can have two things. You can either have a palpable vas bilaterally, or you could have absent vas bilaterally. If there is a palpable vas bilaterally, there is a possibility of a ejaculatory duct obstruction. So what you're going to do in these patients, you would do a transrectal ultrasonography. And in this transrectal ultrasonography, if you find that there is a dilatation of the seminal vesicles, and if you feel that the ejaculatory duct is dilated, you would normally want to go ahead and do a transurethral laser incision of the ejaculatory duct. And once you have done this transurethral laser incision, the place opens up and these patients are going to have a semen with sperms. Now, if it is absent bilaterally on palpation, it probably is congenital bilateral absence of a vas deferens. So what will you do in these people? In these people, what you would do is you would do a CFTR mutation analysis, and further on, you would do a surgical sperm harvesting depending on what needs to be done, which I would bring you in the further slides. So this is one thing which we could do. Now you could have another situation in which you have a normal volume and the pH is more than 7. Now you would like to take a history and physical examination. Now, what is the history which you would like to take? You would like to take the history of small size of testes, whether the patient has had a normal size testes, how is his intercourse, how is he feeling in terms of his sexual desire. You would like to do a physical examination to see the size of the testes. You would like to feel the epididymis. And once you have done this, what you would find is that you could have three conditions. One, suggestive of non-obstructive azoospermia, which could be small testes, soft testes, not suggestive of either non-obstructive azoospermia, where the testes are indeterminate, or you could have suggestive of obstructive azoospermia, where there are normal sized testes and firm and good epididymis. Now let's go on to suggestive of non-obstructive azoospermia. So what would you do? You would do a hormonal profile in these people, and this hormonal profile could have three things. You get an FSH, LH, and testosterone done. When you get, if there is low FSH, if there is low LH, and if there is low testosterone, this is hypogonadotrophic hypogonadism, which I'll bring up the treatment. Now, if there is low FSH, low LH, and high testosterone, which we get a lot of patients, this is gym induced. These people have had anabolic steroid use. So what happens is you give them anabolic steroids. What gets knocked off? FSH and LH, and the testosterone is high because they have been injected. The sperm count goes down. They may be azoospermic. They in fact become azoospermic, a lot of them, and their sexual function is bad. So you have these big men coming to your clinic, and जब ये घुसते हैं ना झुकी हुई नजरों से, the moment they enter your clinic, you know for sure that this is a man who in the gymnasium has been taking hormones and anabolic steroids. And do we know that 80% of the hormones given in gyms are given in 80% of the gyms? And they in fact have something known as gym parties and hormonal get-togethers, where they share with each other how they took testosterone and anabolic steroids. So this should be banned in this country. Well, now third is when there is a high FSH, LH may be high or low, and the testosterone is down. This is when you need to test the Y chromosome microdeletion, get an karyotyping done. These two things need to be done. And once they have been done, there you plan a TISA, a micro TISA, multiple biopsies, or a fine needle aspiration multiple biopsies, which I'll tell you about in a non-obstructive azoospermia. So I've tried to make it as simple as possible on this mind map. And I'm sure you must have liked it. If you've liked it, please type in your comment box BIO, bring it on, because I'm going to bring on now for indeterminate and obstructive azoospermia. So please type it in, bring IO, bring it on, which is BIO, because I will tell you something interesting about patients who are indeterminate. They may have high or low FSH or normal FSH, so they are indeterminate. This is the area of people which may need a testicular biopsy before proceeding further on. Now let us go on to obstructive azoospermia. Obstructive azoospermia is where the testes is producing sperms, but the area which brings out the testes is blocked. So in these patients, either reconstructive surgery would need to be done, and if reconstructive surgery is not possible, then surgical sperm harvesting is the answer. And this could be done by a PISA, by a MISA, by a TISA, or multiple fine needle aspiration biopsies. I'm going to show you videos of my own videos of all these procedures for you to understand that how can you give 70% of azoospermic men their own babies. So, you know, earlier it was thought, especially when Vicky Donor movie came, everybody thought that if they don't have a sperm or if they have low sperms, the only answer is one Vicky Donor. And everybody wanted Ayushmann Khurrana. But the truth is, today, 70% of men can have their own genetic babies. And that is not only very gratifying for the patients, it is phenomenally gratifying for the ART specialist too. So I would I would come back to my the presentation. So the first I'm going to come back to is the hypogonadotrophic hypogonadism. So in hypogonadotrophic hypogonadism, I'll give you an example and I'll give you a story which you would understand. That this was a long time back, about 12 or 14 years back. A patient came to me, in fact, a very rich patient, and they asked me, where can they buy the most expensive sperm in the world? So I asked them, what's the problem? So they showed me a report which was hypogonadotrophic hypogonadism. So I said, I do not know if the most expensive sperm it would be, but I could probably give you your own sperm. The testes were small, FSH was low, LH was low, testosterone was low. We started on hormones. In 6 weeks, the testosterone improved. Testicular size became normal within 6 to 8 weeks, started HMG, and sperms appeared on the 14th week. The number of sperms was not too much, so we decided to go ahead with an ICSI. The first ICSI cycle did not get pregnant. Underwent a second ICSI cycle. In the second ICSI cycle, we transferred 4. This was 14 years back. We transferred 4 with the idea that at least one should be there. She had quadruplets. So we did a fetal reduction. And finally, she gave birth to 2 twin babies. So I used to look 14 years back like this. And my wife used to look like this. So I'm not very sure if there is a difference. But yes, from that time onwards, we understood one thing very clear, that these hypogonadotrophic hypogonadism people are fantastic, because you really can get sperms in 80% of these people, and 80% of these people can have their own sperms. Now let's come on to azoospermia. So azoospermia, there are a lot of techniques to get these sperms. There is PISA, which is percutaneous epididymal sperm aspiration. There is MISA, microsurgical epididymal sperm aspiration. This is normally done only in obstructive azoospermia. You would do a TISA or a TEFNA, where you would like to take a biopsy by a needle from the testes, or you would like to open the testes. This you would normally do where there is a failed PISA, or there is epididymal agenesis, as in congenital cystic fibrosis, absence of vas deferens. If there is a favorable histology in non-obstructive azoospermia as hypospermatogenesis, and you have received this report, you could go ahead and do a TISA, and you could do it if there are previous TISA attempts. Now, testicular sperm extraction, you would do failed TISA, failed PISA, and even at times in a non-obstructive azoospermia. Multiple biopsies and microtesticular sperm extraction, you would do in non-obstructive azoospermia only. But you know what a beautiful technique it is? We've been able to give children to Klinefelter syndromes. We've been able to give children to cancer survivors, where it was not possible at all otherwise. We've been able to give children in maturation arrest, small testes, high FSH, their own children. And therefore, this whole gamut of these surgeries, not only is surgery, it is beautiful, and I would say very laborious, intensified, hard-working embryology work. Because at times it takes 2.5, 3 hours, 4 hours to find those 4 sperms which give those 2 babies. So it's a beautiful work with a lot of hard work which goes into it. So the first is a PISA. There are 2 techniques of doing a PISA. One of them is you could use a BD syringe. Well, you can see it's a beautifully turgid epididymis. Take some media, put in a BD syringe. I hope the video is clear from the streaming, because I have tried to reduce the size of this high definition video.
Yes, sir, it's very clear.
Thank you very much. I really had to work on these videos because they were HD videos, which I had to bring to a situation where their streaming could be done. So over here, these specimens, this is one way of getting a PISA. Now, if you don't, now see, this was a patient who had very inspissated sperms. So we had opened up this patient and we found that the epididymis in this patient had inspissated sperms, and it was so tightly bound and at areas calcified that this epididymis was very thick and bad, but this is all inspissated sperms. So I just made a video which I want to show you. Now, in case you want to do, you have not got it in a PISA with a BD syringe, or it's a simpler way of doing it. You take a 21 gauge butterfly needle and a 10 ml syringe. And when you use this with media in the tube, so the tube has media, and you normally is going to clamp, you will take it out and use this specimen as a PISA specimen. This is the other option which you have. Even the color at times of the liquid tells you whether sperms are there or not. So it's a beautiful procedure and very gratifying. Now, a TISA or a testicular sperm aspiration. What you need in this is a 16 gauge butterfly needle and a 20 ml syringe. So you take this 20 ml syringe with the needle. You normally are going to put this needle into the testes, give pressure, and what happens is that you're able to break some seminiferous tubules, which you are able to pull out in the sample. So the success rates of sperm retrieval are very good. So in congenital absence of VAS, about 100%. In case of vasectomy has been done, about 95%. Infections at times 100%. So it's very good. Sperm retrieval rate is very good. Now, ICSI outcomes are as good as a sperm from patient, a surgically ejaculated sperm. So this is a comparison of the ejaculated sperms with the epididymal sperms or the testicular sperms in obstructive azoospermia. So if you see the fertilization rate, I would say the number of embryos formed, the pregnancy rate, and the miscarriage rates are all about equal. In fact, you find that the miscarriage rate, because the DNA fragmentation is going to be less in a testicular and an epididymal sperm, is in fact less in a few patients, but it is comparable, not statistically significant. So now you come to ICSI outcomes in obstructive azoospermia comparable to fertile donors. Over here also, it's very good. So in obstructive azoospermia, the sperm in obstructive azoospermia is as good as an ejaculated sperm or a donor sperm. Now, what is non-obstructive azoospermia? In non-obstructive azoospermia, it is just like an apple tree. You have a few areas on which spermatogenesis is taking place, and the rest of the area does not have spermatogenesis. So now what will you do? You will have to do a technique where you go to the apples. So you may need to do a TISA, a window biopsy. So as the first specimen, you do a window biopsy TISA. In case you get sperms from this, the job is done. At times we need to do it in obstructive azoospermia, where in PISA and TISA we have not got sperms. Or you would need to do a multiple biopsy, in which you would open up the testes and take biopsies from 4 to 8 places above the equator, 4 to 8 places below the equator. And these multiple biopsies may take you to the apples. So this is one area in which you could use it. Now, this is the testicular tissue. So if you ask me, what do you do with the testicular tissue? So if you see over here, this is the tissue. You normally strip open the seminiferous tubules. So there are tubules which have sperms. You got to strip them open. And when you strip them open, the sperms come out. So this is the way you normally would strip it. And this stripping open would lead to sperms, which you would take out, use for an ICSI, and at times freeze them. So this is a video of these sperms. Now, needle mapping. Now, this is a very interesting procedure which I nowadays follow. And it makes up less traumatic for the patient. So what I normally do is, in the testes, I would mark out 16 areas, put in a needle just like TISA, pull out the sample, place it on a petri dish which has 16 drops. And in one of the drops, where the specimen goes in any of the drops where we find sperms, we know this is the place we have to enter to get a sample. Now, TISA mapping is very important. Now, this is a patient of non-obstructive azoospermia. We did not find any sperms in him on PISA, any sperms in him. So we plan to go ahead with a micro TISA, but before a micro TISA, we planned doing a TISA mapping. So what we do in this, you put in the needle, you give suction, and with suction, normally a tubule is going to come out. With a micro forceps, you would take these tubules, pull them out, and you would get a reasonable amount of testicular tissue and a reasonable amount of seminiferous tubules. So you're going to take these, and once you have taken them, there you are. Once you have taken them, you would pick them up, and you are going to place them. So the area from where you get sperms, either you get adequate sperms, or if you don't get adequate sperms, you take sperms out from that area and use those sperms to give them children. And we in the last 14, 15 years have had so many people who get these babies. The interesting thing is, when a poor responder lady gets her own babies, she's extremely joyful and she tells the world. But when an azoospermic gets his own babies, he's extremely joyful, but he doesn't want to tell anybody, despite the fact that he's had his own child. And I have personally felt it is one of the most gratifying procedures which you could give to these people. Now I'll talk about micro TISA. See, in micro TISA, what we do is we open up the testes. First you open up, see the first layer, second layer, move on to layers. And under a microscope, you see if there are any thickened tubules. If there are any thickened tubules, you're going to take out those thick tubules. And you're going to take those tubules out. And you would try to take out sperms from them. Now this becomes very useful. At times you find all the tubules the same. So you take out any tubules which look different. And at times you could take, if all are identical, biopsies from different areas and see them if you could get them. The easiest to get is in hypospermatogenesis. You also get a lot of sperms at times in maturation arrest, but you get very few sperms in Sertoli-only syndrome. Now, this is the way the procedure normally would be done, where you would open up the testes, and in the first phase, just go on superficially to see if any tubules are thick if they are, you're going to pick them up from there. In case you have got sperms, fine. Otherwise, you would start to bivalve the testes. When you bivalve the testes and you open up the testes, it opens up like a flower, but it also closes so comfortably. So it at times is, so once it opens up like a flower, there are areas from where you could take small specimens. It closes back comfortably, and you have specimens with you which you are going to take to the lab to find sperms. So this is the procedure which we normally would follow for this. This is how it would appear to be, an area. Now, if you see over here, this is a sample in which you find a few sperms, a lot of RBCs, a few debris, and you find over here a motile sperm. So this is a film which I have taken from the TV monitor. So it would have a little bit of disturbance, but this is the way you are going to normally see these sperms in a PISA sample or a sample of even TISA. So in an obstructive azoospermia sample, if the sperm count is less, this is what it appears to be. And even in a TISA sample, this is how it will appear to be. So when you would do an ICSI, there are a lot of techniques the way we would inoculate the plate, for which there is a separate lecture altogether. But what we normally would do is that we would like to inoculate the plate in case these sperms are there, and pick these sperms up. If you see over here, you're going to find a sperm. This is the sperm, and this is the sperm which is going to be picked up. We're going to take this sperm into the ICSI needle. Inject the oocyte, and once we have injected the oocyte, we're going to have a situation where the sperm is in the cytoplasm and we've done the job. So it's extremely gratifying, very good. So there are a few key messages which I'd like to give. One is that obstructive azoospermia sperm retrieval and lab processing is simple. Sperms obtained in virtually all cases. Chances of retrieval is in ICSI outcomes are independent of obstructive etiology, retrieval technique, sperm source. Results are similar or even better than an ejaculated sperm. But in a non-obstructive azoospermia, the sperm production is deficient or absent. The overall retrieval rates is about less than 50%. Its labor-intensive lab processing is really tough. Retrieval rates depend on microdeletion, predictive value, histology, and the size of the testes with the FSH. And the reproductive potential by ICSI is lower than obstructive azoospermia in these patients. But a lot of these patients, you're able to give their children. Hormonal therapy is available, which is, well, I would not talk to you much about it because it's a whole chapter altogether. But I'll talk a little bit about the future. So now you have non-obstructive azoospermia, you have been able to give them children. Obstructive azoospermia, you have been able to give them children. One single system of ICSI has changed the way andrology works, but it has put all the load on the women to get an ICSI cycle done. That's another thing. But a lot of research is going on now, and they have been able to process sperms in rats from spermatogonial stem cells in vitro culture, got those sperms, micro-inseminated them into mice and had children. But in men, it has not been possible to now. But in the future, if there is a non-obstructive azoospermia and spermatogonial stems are taken in, I will just tell you what probably would be done in the future. So of course, we know that the work is going on in genomics, transgenomics, proteomics, metabolomics. Now, something for us to understand over here, we as doctors are the luckiest people in the world at the moment. You know why? Because this pandemic has made people understand the importance of biology and biotechnology. There was an era and there was a time in the 80s and the late 70s where technology boomed. You had from a garage Steve Jobs, you had from a garage Bill Gates, you had so many people who created this magic of technology in which we are today. But the future now is going to be biology, preventive biology, the kind of biology in which if you have a defect, it should be treated before it happens. If you have cirrhosis of liver, you need not have a transplant. Probably stem cells will regenerate your liver. If you have myocarditis, probably stem cells of the heart are going to create the same heart. This probably will be the future. And the testings are going to go in an area where the proteomics is going to tell us that this is the protein we have found, and these are the chances of sperm retrieval. This is the protein we have found, and these are the chances of getting oocytes in you. Now, this is a beautiful slide for us to understand the future. And the future is going to be where in a testicular biopsy, if the tissue is there or cells are there, this tissue could be transplanted into an animal to get sperms. It could be cultured to get sperms. It could be transplanted into the same human being. An auto transplant could begin to get sperms. And if these cells are multiplied and cultured, you could get sperms. Or in the future, when pluripotent stem cells come in, as Dr. Palshetkar was saying, there may be a time when with your skin cell, they could make an ovum or a sperm. Spermatogonial stem cells I have spoken about. So the future is, as I said, male. In the males, transplantation of spermatogonial stem cells, xenotransplantations into animals. Functional genomics will be a big thing for us. I've been in very close contact with Dr. Ashok Agrawal, whom we all know about. And there is so much of work which he has done on DNA fragmentation. And today, his whole team is working on proteomics because they feel that a few proteins, if discovered early, are going to tell us about how this thing is going to fare in andrology. An in vitro generation of sperms, which has taken place in mice, as over here, but has not till now in men, in human beings. CRISPR is a technology which a lot of us know about. I've just put it here because I had read so much about it and was able to visit a laboratory once. What does a virus do in a cell? It enters and replicates your DNA. If you are able to create a system where in the embryo, you could replicate the area which is going to give thalassemia or diabetes and cut it and replace it, you would have an embryo which will not have diabetes and thalassemia which the parents have. This is what CRISPR does. But CRISPR could also give you designer babies. Well, it could have a class where it could have the genome and the cuts of Sachin Tendulkar. So not the cricket class captain. The captain of the Indian cricket team is going to be a designer baby. You don't have Katrina Kaif as a wife, and you want a daughter like Katrina Kaif. you could scissor it off and get a baby like that. But that probably ethically will not be there allowed. But CRISPR, in the next 20 years, you would see, would be a great technology. And in the end, I have something interesting for you to ponder on. A man gives a sperm, a woman gives a ovum, and you have a baby. But if two men who get married want a child, at the moment one gives a sperm after tossing a coin or deciding amongst themselves, and an ovum is taken as a donation and kept in a surrogate. But in the future, the other man could give a pluripotent stem cells to make an ova, and it could genetically belong to both of them. And if there are two women, one's stem cell could be taken to make a sperm, and both of them could be their own parents, the parents of that child. But the interesting thing which will happen with both the women is they would never be able to have a baby boy. And with this, and the interesting thing, the way it is in the world, I would like to say thank you very much to all of you for your patient hearing. There are a lot of questions which have come to us in the paucity of the time, but even otherwise, we would like to answer as many of them as possible. So, Meenalji, have you sent the questions to Dr. Nandita? If you have,
Yes, sir. Yeah.
so Dr. Nandita, if you could answer these questions, because there are a lot of questions which must have come to you.
Yeah, fantastic talk, Sunil. It was really nice. And every time I hear it, I, grasp something new.
Oh, thank you very much, ma'am. Coming from you, I really love it, because even your talk is so crisp, lucid, to the point. In fact, I always feel you always give a take-home message, and it's simple for everybody to get. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So let's do it this way. I'll take one question. You take your one question. One after.
Okay. Great.
So, I've got Dr. DPS Kamla from Ramanathapuram. Premature ovarian failure, can it be due to prolonged use of prednisolone for skin problems? No, that is not one of the reasons for premature ovarian failure. In fact, in autoimmunity, where there are thyroid antibodies which are increased, steroids are given to such patients. So definitely not. You want to take your question next?
There's a question from Dr. Sutha Jyoti from Chennai. Please tell us the normal range of FSH, LH, and testosterone. Well, different societies have different ranges. Different laboratories have different ranges. But if you go to a range, normally in men, it could be before puberty, and during puberty, and post-puberty. So normally pre-pubertal are needed because a lot of children come to us whose parents are very much anxious. They say they have my child has very small genitalia, what to do? So the FSH normally in these people is 0.5, around 0 to 5 milli international units per ml. And in those who are during puberty, it is 0.3 to 10. And in an adult, it is 1.5 to about 13, 14. And a few laboratories have even up till 18 for FSH. LH normally is about 1.5 to 8. And testosterone is very interesting because free testosterone, normally a lot of laboratories come as 2.6 as a normal. But the standard which is considered to be fine today is about 300 as a range, from 300. And even a few societies say that anything below 350 would be the low normal. So this is what we would normally consider as a normal.
Okay, thank you, Sunil. Dr. Sutha Jyoti from Chennai, can you please mention how much CoQ melatonin to be given? CoQ generally is between 100 to 300. I prefer 300 milligrams. And melatonin can be 3 or 4 milligrams per day. So I think that you can give it till you start your stimulation protocol. I give it continuously. And in fact, I had heard a talk on melatonin, one of the pioneers who has worked in melatonin for 40 years, said that melatonin is a good anti-aging also. So it doesn't matter if everybody takes it, it's required for every function in our body. So don't be scared of giving it long term, till your patient gets conceived. Sunil, I have a question for you.
Yes, please.
Dr. Grace from Sri Villiputur, hormonal usage in severe oligo and azoospermia patients.
There is only one thing for us to understand in this. You need to get the testosterone right in any patient who is oligospermic or azoospermic. You can get the testosterone right by 3 drugs, either clomiphene or anastrozole or HCG. You do not give testosterone to these men. So depending on what you plan to give, you would normally try to give these 3 drugs, and you would give these 3 drugs to get the testosterone level to at least 300 to 350 as a free testosterone. So you could use these 3 drugs. You would normally, even before sperm retrieval, in most of our cases, if the testosterone is low, we normally give these people HCG, and we give these HCG till the time we get a testosterone level which is in the normal range. That is when we do retrieval.
What is the dosage schedule of HCG?
The dosage schedule is 2000 international units, twice or thrice a day, a week, for anybody who's around 60 kgs of weight.
Oh.
If the person who comes to you is about 90 kgs or so, then you could increase the dosage depending on that. You need to give this for about 6 weeks at least.
All right, thank you. We have Dr. Sushila Kunte from Korba. Madam, can DHEA and testosterone be given in Poseidon group for patients with endometriosis and adenomyosis prior to IVF? I think this is a very good question because this has always been in my mind. There are lots of studies which say, DHEA, testosterone shouldn't be given in endometriosis patients, PCOS patients, because it worsens them. But recently there were good articles from Norbert Gleicher who said that, in a few patients he's given. And even when I went on the net, because I was wondering whether to give my patient or not, most of the chat groups of the patients, what they say is that we took it, but the doctor says don't take it. But he says if you're taking it, it's okay. So yes, but Norbert Gleicher has now 2020 publication where he has put in that he uses DHEA in endometriosis and adenomyosis to improve the egg quality. So I guess we don't give it for too long. We just give it enough, maybe a month or so till we do the pickup. So that is what the latest is. It's still, I am not using it in endometriosis and adenomyosis patients yet. Again, dose of CoQ and melatonin I've got. And which I mentioned, CoQ is 300, melatonin is 3 to 4 milligrams per day. Do you have any questions?
Yes, I have a question for you, ma'am.
Oh.
Which now the question which I have received at my end is the role of DHEA in poor ovarian reserve.
Wow, I love it. DHEA is excellent in poor ovarian reserve, and what it does is it improves the microenvironment which is there in the follicle, and the androgens are less, and it gets converted into testosterone, and it gives DHT, and that is why it improves the sensitivity of the FSH receptors. It improves the IGF-1 secretion, and also it's also said to be a good effect on the endometrium now, which I didn't mention while talking. But if you have an older patient, DHEA should be added to that patient because there's a deficient androgen production as the woman ages. So it definitely helps patients of poor ovarian reserve.
Fantastic. There is a question which is being asked from me by this Dr. Sudha Jyoti. My goodness, I love the fact that you have so many questions to ask us. And I mean, you're making excellent use of this presentation because thank you very much for asking so many questions. So there's a question which I have received. Is there any prerequisite to be followed when we measure hormones in males? It's very simple. 2 hormones which are most important are FSH and testosterone. But you can get an LH done because it doesn't cost too much in our country. E2 you would like to get done if the man is obese or if you feel that there could be a problem with his E2. So these are the tests you would like to get done. Prolactin has a very, if the patient says, I'm also having sexual problems, get a prolactin done. So that's the way I probably would say you could follow.
I have a good question here, Dr. Sushila Kunte again. We've got really interesting people there. They've listened to our talks, okay? They're not just switched off the video and not listening. Okay. Thanks, Sushila. Madam, can Lupride Depot monthly be given in Poseidon group for patient for pain relief and endometriosis? Dynagist not working, patient waiting for IVF start due to COVID. Will it further suppress the ovarian reserve in these patients? Can DHEA and testosterone be given along with Lupride Depot as adjuvants? I think this is a very, very good question. You know, if it was before 1 month, I would have said, no, Lupride Depot causes suppression, this, that. But there is a fantastic paper just published by the Chinese, 57,000 patients.
My God.
Sunil. And I was just reading it today and I came across it, and they have used this different long protocol where they use the GNRH channel of Depot 1 month, and then they start with the stimulation, and they've got better results, in fact, as compared in the Poseidon group 1 and 2 patients. So I think there is no harm in giving it, and it will help your pain to go away. And it will also take care of the endometriosis, the inflammation, etc., and improve your perifollicular fluid also. So that is one use of it. And the second part of your question is, can it be used with DHEA and testosterone? Yes, you can use it, but you cannot use DHEA plus testosterone. You've got to use one of the drugs. You can't use both together. So in endometriosis, as a rule, I would not give testosterone, but DHEA now, it's very controversial. But I think looking at all the material that was I was reading through, I might just start it in my patients. So the jury is still out.
There is a question I have received, and the question is, if antioxidants are so important, which are the antioxidants to be used?
That's a really good question.
Now, then
I'll go to the female factor.
Okay, and the interesting thing is, see, whichever antioxidant is available, all of them are good. I mean, for the male, you have a system where coenzyme Q, lycopene, vitamin E, vitamin C, zinc, selenium, folic acid, carnitine, they're all very good. In fact, there are studies for all of them where they are good. But in case the motility is down, then coenzyme Q is a good drug. If the number is down, then vitamin E, vitamin C definitely have to be given. If you feel that the patient has a low volume with motility, then there are studies with extraxanthine. But the truth is that all of them work together in most of them. Nowadays, melatonin also has come as a new drug which is being given, which is great. So in fact, whatever is available to you, whatever you can want to give your patient, but the only thing to do is give this for a minimum 2 to 3 months, at least 3 months. So give it for 3 months, and it's a very good drug to give. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Antioxidant.
Coenzyme Q, because it's a mitochondrial antioxidant. So I think that would be good in older patients especially. And as Sunil has said, there's little to choose between the different ones that are there. Arginine is something which I have experience with. I've been using it in women. So that is something which I use. And CoQ, and I think this vitamin C, I do add in a few patients. But I think it's all very random, you know.
It is.
You can't really specify which one. So as Sunil says, use the one which is available. But these are the standard ones which we use in the female, the CoQ and the arginine.
I've received a very interesting question, and the question is from somebody who's really well read. And the question is, in a clinically diagnosed varicocele, even if C1 parameters are normal with a history of infertility, why don't we operate? Because surgery can No, it's in a clinically diagnosed varicocele, even if semen parameters are normal with the history of infertility, why don't we operate? Because surgery can reduce DNA, sperm DNA fragmentation. Okay,
That's a good question.
very nice question.
All
But
the latest research which has been done.
yes, now see, the whether it's EUA, whether it's ASRM, all of them need the semen parameters to be not correct for us to operate. But and there have been studies in which probably they have tried to study the DNA fragmentation which is present in men with a normal sperm count with varicocele, and tried to use it as a judgment for the aneuploidy which may be there. And there's a very large study which has come up recently in which they have found that despite the DNA fragmentation being there in these varicocele patients, there is no statistically significant increase in aneuploidy. And because of this reason, even in this paper, they suggest that in case the semen count is normal, still keeping in mind the DNA fragmentation, you will not operate these patients. This is what the study says. But a lot of studies probably would be needed in the future where we would come to know whether these men need to be operated or not. Probably 4 years from now, they may need a surgery.
Yeah, I know how things are changing, the way things are changing. Okay, I need to tell everybody that Dr. Jumoke Ogunro, I don't know whether I've pronounced it correct, from Lagos, Nigeria, is also watching the seminar. So thank you very much. And we are happy that you're there. There's one question. Yeah, Dr. Sanjana Mahesh from Agra. How long can we use DHA and after how many days we can repeat AMH? Dr. Sanjana, there is actually, I've used, certain patients have disappeared from my practice and come back and they've used it for 1 year, 1.5 years. And I have come to the conclusion that till the patient becomes pregnant, use it. There's no harm in it at all. And AMH, I have stopped repeating it. I have actually stopped repeating it because I feel that the DHA helps in 30 to 40% of the patients sometimes. And then if you keep repeating the AMH, it does not help. It just depresses the patient. So don't bother with the AMH. Just get her pregnant. I think that's the proof of the pudding is in eating it. So the pregnancy would be important. So don't bother with the AMH at all. Sunil, do you agree?
Absolutely. I mean, it's whatever. What I've noticed something about you, and I say this publicly. You always talk practical things. Really.
So we know all our theory and everything, but finally we have to see what we use.
Yes, and you share that. That's the beauty of it. And there's a question which I've received. It is a patient with oligoastenospermia, FSH, LH, E2 testosterone levels normal, no obese, genital examination normal. How to proceed in such patient? Patient doesn't want ICSI. Dr. Isha, this is a whole chapter altogether, which will take about an hour. But the simple fact lies, in any patient.
Take an hour, please.
Yeah. No. It'll be some other time when an hour would be taken for this. But the only thing to understand is, in all these patients, they need to be categorized depending on their physical examination, history, examination, and then depending on their semen analysis, you have to see what is going to help them and give an addition of surgery and ART where needed. Then they would get pregnant.
Okay, Dr. Ritu Santwani from Pune says, fantastic webinar. Thank you, Ritu, for watching us, and I'm glad you enjoyed it. And Dr. D. Vijaya Lakshmi from Hyderabad. It's a very different question. Is there anything like frozen embryos have good success rate? Yes, there were 2-3 articles, but Shapiro's article was the one which really made frozen embryo transfer very famous. And he had a live birth rate of 84% in a frozen thaw cycle. So frozen embryos, because of the technology of vitrification now, have a fantastic pregnancy rate, and it is definitely showing better live birth rates. Though there was a meta-analysis in 2019 which actually said for poor responders, Freeze all is very good. It has good pregnancy rates and all. For normal and poor responders, the jury is still out. They do not say they have equally good pregnancy rates. But now, since we're talking about poor responders, I want to say that in poor responders, I freeze all. I collect embryos. It's known as embryo pooling. So you collect 1122 embryos, pool them, and then do the transfer. And definitely it gives a good pregnancy rate because you're using a lot of stimulation, different stimulation protocol. It can have an effect on the endometrium. So freezing takes away all those negativities and gives you a clean cycle. And a natural cycle is supposed to be the best for frozen, but HRT is what we use because of convenience and yeah. What to say?
It's a very interesting question which I've just received.
Yeah.
And the question is that in azoospermic men who come to you with non-obstructive azoospermia, how do you counsel them that if sperms are not available, what is to be done? Very interesting question because it's a very practical question.
Yeah.
Now, there is somebody who has non-obstructive azoospermia or even obstructive azoospermia who comes to you and says that I don't have sperms. What are the chances of my getting sperms? So if there is obstructive azoospermia, the chances of their getting sperms is over 95%. So there is no problem with that. You tell them it is 95% chances, and we could do a surgery before and freeze them. In case you get sperms, you could go ahead with an ICSI cycle. In case you don't get sperms, it is for you to decide. But in non-obstructive azoospermia, especially in those patients where you want to do a micro TSA, which normally we do at the time when we are retrieving sperms, retrieving the eggs before that. Because of the reason that at times all that you get is 3 to 4, 5 sperms. And if you freeze them, 50% of them are gone. So what we normally would do is, in these patients, we would always tell them that in case you want to go ahead for a micro TSA ICSI, you have the option of getting a micro TSA ICSI done before the cycle. But in case we get sperms, there is a 50% chance of loss of these sperms. And in case you want the cycle to be done at the time when we are retrieving your eggs, then you either have to make sure in your mind whether you would like to cancel the cycle or you would like to take a donor sperm. So the answer for this is you need to be absolutely transparent and true with these patients. And if you are, believe me, they always are with you.
I've received a very interesting question from Dr. Jumoko. He says, is it sacrosanct that you use only GnRH agonist to trigger in double stimulation? What happens if you trigger with HCG? Initially, I have triggered with HCG, but now when I came across this paper, what I realized was that the agonist causes an endogenous LH surge. So it doesn't stay for long in the body, whereas HCG has a longer half-life. So it remains in the body and probably interferes with the new thing. I mean, that's what I think personally. So that is why the with the dual stim GnRH agonist would be a better trigger.
There's a question which is there for you.
Yeah.
From Dr. Alka Bishnoi from Bijnor. What is the recent chance of patients of POF to have their own babies?
What are
the chances of a patient with premature ovarian failure to have their own babies?
I think initially, if I talk about the standard techniques, the chances are very, very low. Though Norbert Gleicher has published papers with POF where he's given DHEA for a long time and they have produced eggs. But I think the new kids on the horizon, the PRP and the bone marrow derived stem cells are something that we can experiment with these patients and give them a drug. And use this. The other thing is that if your patient is fertile and due to autoimmunity, she has become POF, I have seen that this patient comes back with a baby because the autoimmunity disappears. It may be just for some time, short period. So you have to find out what is the cause of this POF. But yeah, I think there is a lot of hope with PRP and bone marrow stem cells. But again, POF is about 1 to 2% of the patients. And out of this, a few will respond to it. So you really should not, as Sunil said, you have to give them the truth. That this may or may not work. It's very, very important when you offer this to your patients. I have another question by Dr. Jumoko itself. He's asking very difficult questions. Does the use of blood thinners help when stimulating women with very low AMH or very high AMH? I don't think it really helps with low AMH, but very high AMH, yes, probably it reduces your, the VEGF also. The LMWH has an anti-inflammatory effect, but I'm really not sure. I don't use it, so I have no experience in that at all. Dr. Sutha Joshi again, please explain how long you can wait for good endometrium in FET cycle, and please mention in whom you would use GnRH down regulation HRT cycle. That's a good question. My HRT transfers can happen between 18 day to 30th day. I don't mind waiting for that long. Secondly, I do down regulation in PCOS patients because they have an endometrial polypoidal endometrium sometimes. So it really helps them. And endometriosis patients and adenomyosis. It really helps in down regulating these patients. So these are the only patients where I actually use GnRH to down regulate. And of course, also convenience. If the patient comes and they want to do it quickly, they've come from abroad, then we don't bother with the GnRH analog and all. The high levels of, if you start estradiol varilate of 6 milligrams per day, usually there's no follicle which is seen, even in ovulatory patients. Okay.
There are, so many questions which are there. In fact, there is one question which I have received now,
Yeah.
and the question is for you, ma'am.
Oh.
People are very fond of you.
I have just chosen the woman. The woman is so popular.
I know. And the question is, very interesting. The question is, when a poor responder comes to you who has been already told that the only way you can have a baby is by a donor egg, what is the counseling which you give to them in case they want their own egg?
Fantastic. I've just delivered a 42-year-old with her own eggs, and she had an AMH of 0.3, and she actually came away from the doctor. She said, sorry, usne egg donation bola hai, I want my own eggs. So I didn't require much counseling. I said, let me do it. No. But I think what is important is when any couple comes to you, every woman wants to have her own baby. Okay. So I think when you're counseling, what I do normally is I tell them that I would like to give you one opportunity at least, if you want. We will stimulate you and see if you have the eggs, because a lot of times they can't afford it, or the time frame, they're fed up. They've taken so much treatment that they're fed up. So I think it's always important to give them both the choices and tell them that it would be your choice. But what I always tell them is it's like Vaishno Devi. You can go with a helicopter to Vaishno Devi. That means take an egg donor and get pregnant. Or you can climb up Vaishno Devi. That's the long and hard road.
Wow.
With your own eggs. And I said, we are always willing to go with you if you want to go the hard way. That's the way I counsel my patients. And I think it really, it clarifies what they are in for. See, it's a difficult process, Sunil. It's not easy.
True. And मुझे तो ये लगता है कि वैष्णो देवी पैदल चलने का पुण्य ज्यादा होता है. हेलीकॉप्टर से तो कोई भी जा सकता है. So fantastic. Now I would like all of you people who are there, how many people are, if they are there at this time, because it already has been 2 hours now, you could put in a number. I tried to put it into the chat box. It is 800-6666-085. Save this number. WhatsApp your name and number to this number. We would save it and broadcast you an algorithm. Madam, I would need an algorithm which is to be sent to all of them.
Those two are good ones, which I have at the end of the talk.
Yes. If you could just send them on this. So I just send it to everybody and they would be utilizable for them. So please note down the number 800 6666 085. Just save this number in your phone. Send this from this number, your contact, from your number to this number. We would put you in a broadcast list and send you the algorithm. So you would receive it. And that should be great. So, ma'am, shall we?
Last message from Dr. Bharti More from Navi Mumbai. Hi, Bharti. She's a good friend.
Okay.
Super discussion and practical take-home messages. Thank you, both of you. So, Bharti, thank you very much. And I think we must thank our audience for being so good and asking such wonderful questions.
Wonderful questions, very interactive audience. I have a few questions now, but I think we're closing to 2 hours and the slot was booked for this time. The questions left would be answered in the next episode. And we have a very interesting next episode. How many of you have had patients with recurrent pregnancy loss? If you want this recurrent pregnancy loss to be demystified, be there in the next webinar 15 days from today. I mean, a Tuesday after the next Tuesday. We would send you the information. A recurrent pregnancy loss for men, for women as well as men. People think only women are responsible for everything. But for everything good happening, women, of course, are responsible. For everything bad happening, men are 50% partners. So, since men are 50% partners, men are also 50% partners in recurrent pregnancy loss. So, madam and I are going to demystify recurrent pregnancy loss 15 days from now. Be there. If you WhatsApp your number now, onto this number and save this number, we would send you the link for it so that you are there next time. We would love to have you with us next time. And thank you very much for being such a patient audience, because the pleasure of presenting something nice and giving it to people is only there when people are there to receive it. And you have been amazing. Your questions are amazing. Thank you.
Before we go, Anu from Bangalore has asked a question. I have to answer it. DHA and testosterone gel together should not be given. Those two drugs should not be given together. So sayonara, bye. I couldn't resist that. We will see you after 2 weeks.
See you after 2 weeks. Everybody here, 712 or whatever members or whatever 1,000 members over here, we'll have all of you together. Next time, 15 days from now, WhatsApp your number. We're going to send you this, and the next program is going to be fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, doctor. Thank you so much. It was indeed a great scientific feast.